Hey, it's Art from my new microphone. If you've been producing or mixing music for a while, especially if you're working with vocals, you've likely come across and used a de-esser before. If you're wondering what a de-esser is or why we might use it and have any reservations about using de-essers in your mixes, this video is for you. We're going to dive into what a de-esser is and why we would want to use it, particularly on vocals in the mix, and how they can help with our vocal production to get more professional sounding mixes. So without further ado, we're going to hop into the digital audio workstation and get started with de-essers. All right, here we are inside of Logic Pro to talk about de-essers, what they are, and why we use them in our mixes. So I have three de-essers loaded up for you. The first is the FabFilter Pro-DS. The second is the Waves De-Esser, and the third is Logic Pro X's stock De-Esser 2. And so a de-esser is a dynamics processor, much like compression or limiting, that acts upon a very specific range of frequencies. Those frequencies are known as the sibilance frequencies or the sibilance range, and those can be particularly harsh in vocals when we make S sounds or Z sounds, or even T's and D's in some instances. And these sibilant frequencies can often be overly harsh in the mix and overly distracting, leading to lackluster results. So de-essers help us to tame those dynamically within the mix whenever they show up in order to get better results. When pinpointing the exact frequencies of the sibilance range, we have to take into account the vocalists themselves, the language being spoken or sung, and any processing that we are using on the vocal before or after the de-esser. They are typically found within the 4,000 to about 10,000 range, 4,000 being awfully low, 10,000 being awfully high. And so we should usually look for them in those ranges if they stick out of the mix and are particularly harsh. We often want to use de-essing to just focus on those frequencies and not overly affect all of the other frequencies that make up the vocal. And we also want them to only act on the sibilants when they are actually there. We could opt to use an EQ if I just brought up a simple channel EQ in Logic right here. And let's say the sibilance in a particular vocal was at 6850, we could do something like that, but then that would be constantly on the vocal. Rather, we want something to act dynamically. So before we get into de-essers properly, I could demonstrate this actually with a dynamic EQ. For example, if we open up the FabFilter Pro Q3 and opened up a dynamic EQ, I will make this one dynamic. We could set that at, for example, 6,850, and then we could drag down this dynamic range so that when there is significant energy in this band, the FabFilter will bring it down. So this is a little bit of a sidetrack, but it just helps to visualize what a de-esser actually does. If I played this vocal back. Should I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay. Whenever there's energy built up in that range, the dynamic EQ brings it down. Another way of looking at this that is more technically correct is multiband compression. So again, if we go back to FabFilter, I can look at the Pro MB. Again, as a sidetrack, but just a way to help visualize de-essing because it can be a bit complicated. I could start a band right here, center that band at that 6,850 just as an example. And then again, as there's energy that's built up in there, it will trigger this down. Should I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay. My rest is. So this is pretty much what a de-esser is doing. It's just much simpler than setting up a full multiband compressor or a dynamic EQ, which are a bit less specialized, a bit more generalized, and can do much more for our mix. The de-esser is rather specialized on those sibilance frequencies, and they are designed to make it easy for us to find the sibilance frequencies and then to dynamically control them within the mix. And so let's close down these two and have a look first at the Pro-DS. And so this again is on the lead vocal. I'll bring this to the center. Let's actually exit out of these two so that we can only focus on the DS. And much like a compressor, we have the threshold right here. And what I love about FabFilter plugins is that if you hover over them, they will give you a box right there to show you exactly what these do. So the range knob simply scales the detected gain reduction so that it stays within a desired range with a maximum of 24 dB. And so, for example, if this range is at 8 dB, then the Pro-DS will only ever reduce the gain of the sibilance by 8 dB. There's no ratio control in this plugin, but we do have the threshold control right here. So in this case, anything that goes above this threshold, at this point it is at negative 42.77 dB, the Pro-DS will kick in and reduce that up to a maximum of 8 dB. The frequency range in which the Pro-DS will act can be honed in right here. We can actually go all the way down to 2 kilohertz, all the way up to 20,000 kilohertz seemingly. At this point, it just turns off, but usually we are going to be somewhere in the range of 5 to maybe 10 5 to 9. Let's go 7 to 9.5 right here and just audition this. So we are going to audition basically a bandpassed sidechain signal for this Pro-DS. You can hear a lot of that sibilance. If I solo this, maybe make that a bit higher. And here's the full vocal.
Eyes were better spent with you in arms and me in bed cutter.
You can see the gain reduction right here.
Should if I have walked away?
So it is acting like a compressor, but only on this range. So a single band compressor.
You in arms and me in bed
Maybe I can turn up that range. Turn down the threshold. We'll get more de-essing.
Walked away. Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights were better spent with you.
And here we have wideband versus split band. So in split band, we are only going to reduce the gain in this range right here that has been set up in the sidechain, versus wideband, we will actually turn down the entirety of the audio signal. And so I can demo this when I make things very obvious. This is wideband.
Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay.
Where the whole signal is coming down, and then in split band, we are only bringing down this sidechain frequency range right here from about 7K to 10K.
Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay.
So you heard that the sibilants are really getting crushed there. I would never de-ess this hard, but I'm just trying to make things obvious. Versus in wideband, you can hear the entirety of the signal coming down when the de-esser is applying that gain reduction.
Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights were better.
So we have to be careful in split band that we don't make the vocalist sound like they have a lisp, versus in wideband, we have to be careful that we aren't dropping the entire vocal down and making it hard to hear within the context of the mix. So speaking of the context of the mix, let's listen to the vocal with everything else.
Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to.
This is wideband.
My restless nights were better spent.
Split band.
You in arms and me in bed cutter. Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless.
So chose to stay right there. It sounds like she has a lisp when I'm really hitting it hard.
That I chose to stay. My
versus wideband, the vocal just comes down in level.
That I chose to stay. My restless.
The entire vocal. And so this is way too much de-essing, but just to make things obvious for you. So if I was to actually de-ess this vocal, which I will do in the mix, we could go ahead and deal with it like this. I'll go to split band, and we already auditioned pretty much where the bulk of the sibilance is. And then I'm just going to dial in the threshold and range to get an appropriate amount of de-essing.
Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights.
About 4 dB of gain reduction.
You in arms and me in bed cutter. Should if I have walked away? Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights were better spent with you in arms and
I think that that's good without it.
That I chose to stay. My restless nights were better spent. Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights were better spent.
And it just helps take off some of the harshness in the vocal right there. If we have a listen in solo once again, here is without the Pro-DS.
Crazy that I chose to stay.
Particularly on the chose to stay, those are particularly harsh.
Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights were better spent with.
And here's with the DS on.
Crazy that I chose to stay. My restless nights were better spent with.
So it just helps to curb a little bit of those harsh sibilants without taking away too much from the vocal. You see here in the sidechain, we can also utilize an external sidechain if we wanted to, another signal that when that signal is particularly sibilant, it will cause gain reduction on the audio passing through this plugin, which in this case is the lead vocal. I'm not going to get into sidechains and their role in dynamics processing in this video, but I do have a video going into detail about what sidechains are and how they work. I'll leave that in the description box down below if you are interested. So that is the Pro-DS and the basics of how de-essing works. And again, we use de-essing to help tame the harshness of sibilants in our vocals. Next up, we have the De-Esser from Waves. I can open this one up. This one's set up a little bit different. In this case, we have audio, split, or wide. And so this is going to control what the gain gain reduction is acting upon. So again, the split is only going to affect the frequencies that are triggering the de-esser, whereas the wide is going to bring down the entirety of the vocal. Right here we have frequency, which is going to be where we are targeting those sibilance frequencies. And then the sidechain right here, we can choose it either to be a bandpass, so that is going to be centered around the, in this case, 7,230 hertz. Or we can have a high pass, in which case everything above 7,230 hertz or whatever I set this to will be used to trigger the de-esser. And so let's bring this back down to about 7K. If we liken this to the Pro-DS right here, you can see that this is the same control effectively as what we have down here, except we are actually centering around a frequency here, and we actually have more control over the two extremes of the bandpass right here. And then if we wanted a high pass, we would just turn that low pass, so to speak, off in the Pro-DS. In this case, we only have one control. It's a little bit simpler. And then we have this sidechain control right here, either to center it around this frequency in bandpass or to have everything above this frequency in the high pass mode. And then much like the addition button right here, we have our monitoring mode right here where we can monitor the audio going through the de-esser or the sidechain, which is acting to control the de-esser. So let's set things up using the de-esser from Waves here. I will monitor just the sidechain to get started. And you hear that sibilance. Now the audio.
Restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my...
Again, there's no ratio control in this. There's only the threshold. And in the de-esser, we don't even have a range control like we did in the Pro-DS. So there's no maximum I can set in terms of gain reduction. I have to do everything with this threshold control right here.
Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent.
So I'm getting about 12 dB at the maximum.
To stay my restless nights
without it.
Better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights.
Let's turn this to a bandpass, so I'm not cutting down on all of that top end. You hear there that when this is in high pass and I'm taking down everything above 7,500, that we really lose a lot of that high end.
Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better.
It immediately brightens up when I take that off.
That I chose to
I go into bandpass.
Restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent.
We are only focusing on those sibilant frequencies, and the high end, that nice bright airiness of the vocal, can stay intact as I'm applying gain reduction with the de-esser. And of course, we can apply this to the split, which just prompted my differentiation between this bandpass and high pass, or we can go wide and just attenuate the entirety of the signal.
Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose.
And so when it's wide like this and it's acting on all of the frequencies of the audio passing through the de-esser, it can be actually a little bit more natural sounding because we aren't altering the frequency content of the signal like if we were only dealing with this bandpass or the high pass filter. And so some people often opt to use the wide mode. I prefer the split mode personally. It's just what I've always done. But the wide mode is there if you would like to use it as well. So that is the de-esser from Waves. And then we also have the De-Esser 2 from Logic, which has very much the same sort of controls as the Waves option. We have our threshold, except we have a max reduction in this case. We have our center frequency, and then the filter can be a high pass, or in this case, it looks like a low pass, but that's just to say that we're going to be reducing frequencies above this set frequency right here, or we can have a bandpass filter, although it looks in this case like a notch filter, or a bell cut, because again, we are going to be reducing the gain of, again, this frequency right here. We have our split and wide range here as well. And then we have the filter solo so that we can effectively listen to the sidechain and figure out exactly where those sibilants or harsh frequencies are. So I can turn this on. We also have mode, relative versus absolute. Most of Logic's dynamic processors have this control. We'll leave it on relative for now and have a listen here.
Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my
in the context of the mix,
nights were better spent with. Crazy that I chose to stay my restless nights.
you can see the detection and then the reduction right here.
that I chose to stay my restless nights.
And if I use this high pass right here, you hear that we lose a lot of that top end. I don't find that this one does as good a job as the other two, but I figured I would show to you anyway. And I can use wide. So you hear it working there. It is bringing down those harsh sibilants, but I don't find it does as good a job as the other two options that we had here. I think that perhaps the band in this de-esser is a little narrow, and you see that it's doing a lot more reduction, but it's not tackling those harsh sibilants as well as the other two. Again, just my opinion, but I wanted to show you 3 different options to give you a good look at how a de-esser that you may be using may be set up. So to recap, we utilize de-essers in our mixes to reduce the harsh sibilants, especially in vocals, those frequencies that can be really harsh in the mix and very fatiguing and distracting. And de-essers are just super specialized tools that effectively work as single band compressors in that specific frequency band that hosts vocal sibilants. Or alternatively, we can look at it sort of like a dynamic EQ that is very focused, again, on those sibilance frequencies. It took me a little while to wrap my head around de-essers when I was first getting started, and I actually never used them really. I started with music production doing more instrumental work, and then once I started bringing in vocals, whether that was my own vocals or recording other people, I didn't really have any experience with de-essers, and so it took me a while to start incorporating them into my workflow, and I would highly recommend you get these into your workflow if you're working with vocals as soon as possible, and just get familiar with them, get comfortable with them, and use them in your mixes, and I think that they will benefit your work tremendously, especially if you are working with vocals. So that's what I've got for you inside Logic Pro today. All right, I hope that I was able to enlighten you on the use of de-essers in our mixes and music production endeavors. If you'd like to learn more about mixing, I do have a free mixing guidebook. It will be the first link in the description box down below. You can click on that, sign up to my newsletter, and I'll send it to you right away. This will help you with the framework of mixing from start to finish to help you make the right decisions at the right times in your mixes. And if you'd like to spend more time with me here on YouTube, I do have another few videos for you to check out in the top left and right corner. And I'd also invite you to check out the entire channel and subscribe if you'd like more information from me here on mixing and music production. So I hope to see you in the next video, and I'd like to thank you once again for spending some time with me here in this one. So that's all I've got for you today. Cheers.